Hello and welcome to SoulSchool and to my webinar all about radiance, how radiance is everywhere, and that includes in you. So this is quite a long presentation, but I think you'll find it's quite exciting, and I hope by the end of it you will feel inspired. So the title, Radiance Everywhere, how to discover the divine presence in your life. So I'm going to take you on a journey, a short journey of discovery. First of all, we're going to talk about what is radiance. Then I'm going to talk about encounters with divine radiance, like people who've had experiences of it. Then I'm going to talk about your radiant being, who is like your guardian angel, has some similarities, and is also your guide to joy, to healing, to abundance. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about methods that people can use for releasing the energy of radiant being in themselves. And that includes you, of course. So what is radiance? It's the underlying vital energy that sustains everything in creation. It has been called the élan vital. In Hebrew, there's a word shefa, and this is the divine energy that flows through life, sometimes translated as everflow, or divine sustenance, or divine abundance. And this would be similar to chi or ki, which we find in the Oriental systems. You get it in the word Reiki, because Reiki is a healing system that is calling on vital energies to move through the body and revitalize it. And in Hebrew, sometimes shefa is replaced by or, which means light. So in many systems, the élan vital is thought of as light. So the power of divine radiance is seen in the cosmos. We can see that it is intelligent and it's constantly designing, creating, renewing through its capacity to make patterns that are harmonious. And everything that it manifests is beautiful. And when we experience this directly in our own being, we feel blessed. And those moments are sacred. They're full of grace. So hold those words, those three words, in your mind: beauty, harmony, grace. The writer Dostoevsky, in his book The Idiot, has a character called Prince Minsk. And this character declares, beauty will save the world. And I think that's such a wonderful statement and something to remember all the time when we're watching things that feel very insecure. So what kind of people have direct experience with radiance? Well, there are biblical patriarchs and prophets. There are all kinds of religious leaders, not just biblical ones. There are saints and mystics, especially in Christianity. But there are also poets, artists, musicians, and also people who have near-death experiences or take drugs, psychedelic drugs, but also people who meditate. So one of the most famous historical characters who had an experience like this was Moses. He saw a blazing bush and he heard a voice at the same time, the voice of the divine speaking to him. And another biblical character, Daniel, who's more famous really for being rescued from the lions when he was thrown to the lions. But there's another story in which he has a vision by the river of a shining being that he calls a man. And he also hears a thunderous voice. And he identifies this light and this voice as being an angel, Archangel Gabriel. So Gabriel takes us on to another very famous encounter with the divine energy, and that is the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary. And she experiences an encounter with an angel, which has been depicted in so many ways over so many centuries. It's hard to choose which portrayal to choose. But this particular one, I've always been intrigued by. It's very elaborate. It's very Renaissance. It's not a bit like Mary would have been in a great palace like this. However, I chose it because up in the sky, you can see this celestial orb and a light coming from it, descending right through the architecture into the room where Mary is praying, and then touching her on the forehead. And there is a little dove in there. You know how often the dove turns up in pictures of the Holy Spirit descending. But it's quite intriguing that the dove is just in the room with her. But what is that great energetic light in the sky? Actually, one person said to me, thought it looked a bit like a UFO, but it's certainly a power which is huge and vast. And when it descends, it turns up in the shape of a bird. So I really like this image. Oh, sorry about that. Next one. But here's another one of Mary, which I think is really wonderful to consider. This picture is designed to think of her being in a temple, not in her own home, but she's in the temple and she is spinning. So you see in her hand, she's sort of spindle. She's actually spinning a red thread. It's not a biblical story that she's spinning. There's another, what they call an apocryphal text, which suggests that she was engaged with a holy activity in the temple, spinning the thread to make the veil. Now, the veil was like a curtain that came down between the people who came into the temple and the hidden Holy of Holies, where the priests would go and open the Ark of the Covenant. And this was hidden from people. And there was a veil there. And it was woven in different colors, one of which was red. Purple was another. And when Jesus is crucified, the story goes that the veil is torn in two because there's been an apocalypse. a rendering of the veil. Jesus has done something so extraordinary that the old priesthood no longer is has the same role anymore. And there again, you can see a little bird up in the corner. And Mary is being filled with grace. That's what they say in the Catholic tradition. Hail Mary, full of grace. So she is in a state of perfect harmony, beauty, grace with the cosmos and the desire of the divine to bring something new into the world. So then a lot later along in the story of Mary and her child, Jesus, a lot later, we get this description of how he goes to the top of a mountain with his followers, and they see him transfigured. That's the word that's used. He's transfigured. His physical body is changed. His face is shining like the sun, and his garments become white as the light. And also, a couple of prophets turn up with him. The followers can see Moses and Elijah. And that's rather intriguing, because at one point in the gospel stories, people are asking Jesus if he is Elijah come again. And Elijah, like Enoch, is reported to have been taken up to the heavens in a fiery chariot to become an archangel. Metatron, you may know, becomes the archangel. Metatron, Elijah becomes Metatron, and Enoch becomes Metatron, and Elijah becomes Sandalphon, and they're regarded as twin brothers. And this is a metamorphosis, and it's a luminous mystery, it's called, and it's celebrated by people who say the rosary. So it's a very key role, and I've always thought it was a key story in the Jesus history, because for me, this transfiguration, this light moment, illumination, is much more significant, really, than the crucifixion. And perhaps we could say it's only because he has been transfigured that he is able to come back as a resurrected being from his suffering. And this is why I think the Orthodox are right to focus much more on the glory of Christ rather than so much on the crucifixion, which the Western Catholic Church is focused on. And this icon shows the four creatures: the bull, the lion, the man, and what have we got? The bull, the lion, the man, and the eagle. And they represent the four compass points. They represent the world as it is in its four square presence and manifestation. And therefore, what this image displays is the fact that by going through the process of becoming a light being, realizing his light, then Jesus Christ has actually become a transfigured human who is no longer bound by time. He's gone beyond those limits. We could say that because these are astrological figures as well, we could say that when you become a figure of light, then the astrological limitations that you experience by being a person incarnated at a certain time in a certain place, they are kind of lifted from you. They are of less significance for you in your life. They won't ever go away while you're incarnated in this present lifetime, but they are less, shall we say, less inhibiting. St. Paul is another character who experiences a bright light, and he actually says that he was blinded by it for several days. And he heard Jesus actually speaking to him, and that prompts him to become an enthusiastic missionary for Christianity. And it's really down to St. Paul that we have the Christian church as it is today, in all its different comings and goings. To take a sidestep from the Judeo-Christian story, we also have the story of Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, who spent some time praying in a cave, wrapped up in his cloak. This is a kind of sensory deprivation, which is intended to help change the state of consciousness. And he meets Gabriel, this powerful encounter with a being. And there are various descriptions, not in the Quran itself, but in various Islamic stories and legends about the appearance of Gabriel, which is almost beyond description, with thousands of wings and thousands of glowing eyes, and it is quite extraordinary. But whatever he encounters there gives him a divine message and tells him to recite. And he claims that he doesn't know how to read or write. But he is told to make this recitation, and this becomes the Quran, which is, and I don't know Arabic myself, but I've been told that this is the most beautiful poetry. And one can understand that through beautiful poetry, the people who recite it, even today, they will be stepping into that same vibration, and they will also experience a state of grace and harmony and beauty. And that is most likely why this tradition is so enduring. It's got that power of the cosmos behind it. So moving back to the Christian story, we find that men and women, but I'm going to tell you about some women here, who step into a role of detachment, become members of closed orders. They give up being married, they give up their personal possessions, they become nuns, and they focus on the inner experience with the divine. And this woman, Hildegard of Bingen, was a German abbess. She's very famous for being a composer as well. She composed wonderful music. A few years ago, her music was recorded onto a CD album called Feather on the Breath of God. And that became a bestseller. Some of you may know it. And when she was in her early 40s, she had a profound experience. She uses the word blazing. Something came into her brain, which was blazing, and very intense light. And then she understood all kinds of things. And in some of her poetic writings, which followed that, these are some of her words. I am the fiery life of divine substance. I blaze above the beauty in the fields. I shine in the waters. I burn in the sun, moon, and stars. Another Christian, well, she wasn't a nun, she's actually called an anchoress. But Julian of Norwich was an English woman, medieval religious woman, who lived a solitary life, not in a community. She was in one room with only her cat for company. So this icon has portrayed the cat. And one of her descriptions of the divine presence is of seeing or experiencing it being contained in something really tiny, like a hazelnut, in which the whole cosmos was contained. So this is a very mystical experience of knowing that, it's a bit like the grain of mustard seed, and you can hold something in your hand, which is really tiny, but it contains everything. And she's also very famous for saying, all shall be well. All manner of thing shall be well. So she's very reassuring about our relationship with divine presence. And here's another, this is my third religious lady from this pre-Reformation series. Teresa of Avila was a Roman Catholic nun. She was in a community, but she came from a Jewish family, which I find very interesting. She wrote an autobiography called The Interior Castle. So she places a lot of emphasis on going inwards to find the different levels or layers of your own consciousness, almost as though they are rooms nesting inside each other. And how she describes it really does match the Jewish mystical system. So whether that happened because she'd heard about the Jewish mystical system from people in her family and her family was compelled to become Christian. They were what was called conversos, forced baptism, but no doubt continuing their discussions about their old faith. Whether she'd heard about that before she becomes a nun, or whether, I suspect, because she's Jewish, it's kind of there present in her DNA for. She's got easy access to those states of consciousness, and she just finds a new language for it. You can decide. It's a very interesting book called Crucible of Gold. I try to remember the author's name now, but anyway, that was someone's dissertation who discusses how Teresa's visions are so, in many ways, so Jewish, even though she's a Roman Catholic. Now, I'm just going to move over slightly to the yogic tradition, because what we've seen in those pictures of those ladies, they've all got halos. And this is common in pictorial representations of saints, that they have a halo, a glow around the head. And in Kundalini Yoga, this is called the arc line. And it's a line of energy that stretches from ear to ear and across the brow. So it's recognized in Kundalini as part of the process. And they describe it as a nucleus of the human aura, where all the energies of the chakras come to congregate and to rest. And I really like this image of it because it's got it looking like a tree. Not only is there a radiant being who's kind of engaged and present with the man who's sitting in his lotus position, but we get this idea of the tree, which is really important in this kind of work. So I'm just hopping back to Jesus because when he transfigures, we don't see images of him just with a halo. We see images of him with his whole body. It's not an arc line, it's the whole of his system is radiating light. Go back to this quotation, the light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light. This is the radiant being. Everyone can see it as well. So I've been talking about people, what people see and what people experience within themselves. But this divine radiance is present everywhere in all creation. And in the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus says the kingdom of the Father is spread out across the earth, but people do not see it. And this is echoed by the poet William Wordsworth. He's not a religious man. He's not a monk. He's not, he's not practicing prayers all day. He's going out walking in nature. And he says that every common sight seems to be apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. So Wordsworth, as a poet, is open to the energy and the power of radiance in the world, even though he's not saying his rosaries. So you remember what Hildegard said? I burn in the sun, the moon, and the stars. So it's everywhere. It's in the whole cosmos, as I said at the beginning. And some people experience that, as I say, even if they're not in a monastery or a nunnery. And this, of course, is what we see in the famous Starry Night painting by Van Gogh. He was seeing it and trying to paint it. And in some ways, it was so intense, it was not very good for him. He might have been better if he had been in a monastery, because he would have people to support him, because these visions can be very intense. You need to be well grounded. Now, going back to Dostoevsky and his story about the idiot, Beauty Will Save the World, that I quoted at the beginning. In the story, the idiot, the reason the title is such, is that Minsk, Prince Minsk, has a tendency to experience epileptic seizures. And Dostoevsky knew about that personally because it happened to him. And this neurological divergence is often associated with mystical perception. So when Minsk says the beauty will save the world, he's really Dostoevsky saying that. And Dostoevsky saw the world in that way because the way we would describe it now is neurologically divergent. And I've had quite a lot of experience with epilepsy myself because my husband had a tendency to have these seizures. And he certainly understood the world in a completely different way from most people. And a lot of his songwriting indicates that. So experiencing the divine radiance within you is very enlivening. We've had the story of Hildegard and how she experiences a blazing light. And here is a poet from the 20th century, this is written, W.B. Yeats. And this is from quite a long poem, but this section of it, he describes how he's sitting in a shop in London, busy, busy place, with an open book and an empty cup on his tabletop. And while he's looking at the shop and the street, I gazed. My body of a sudden blazed. And 20 minutes, more or less, it seemed, so great my happiness that I was blessed and could bless. So in this description, Yeats, in the middle of a busy city, in the middle of a busy shop, is having an extraordinary experience of divine radiance. And he feels overwhelmed by the happiness of it. And he feels as though he is being blessed, but that also he can give out. There's so much of it that he can bless, and it's flowing through him. And just to go back to my husband, he had a similar experience in Paddington Station once. So you don't need to be like Wordsworth, out in nature. The poet and painter and artist William Blake, who I haven't really got time to include them all, but Blake had visions of angels in London as well. So it doesn't mean that you have to be in a sacred space. You don't have to be in a nunnery, or you don't have to be like Julian of Norwich in your little room all the time. You can be in very busy places and you can still experience it. So why, one wonders, this is something we could ask, why is Yeats experiencing the whole body being full of light when he's sitting in a London cafe? I mean, what is there about Yeats that might mean something like that might happen to him? My husband was coming back from a transformative sort of self-help weekend when he had his Paddington experience. So there was something that put him in a different state of mind. Now, Yeats was a poet, and his inclination was mystical. He might say that was something to do with being Irish. He was a visionary. But he was also a magical practitioner and a student of Kabbalah and a member of the Golden Dawn. So he was actually doing initiations and meditations that might have put him in the right state of being. And then when he goes to the shop and sits at the cafe table, perhaps his mind is just lifted off everyday concerns, and all of a sudden it happens. So we ask ourselves, what do these experiences mean for us today, right? And even though in Paddington Station or in a London shop, you could have these experiences, most people rarely take any time out, and they're failing to see the radiance of divine radiance. As Jesus says, it's spread out across the earth, but people don't see it. And that's a great sadness, because reconnecting with the radiance within us, the radiant being, brings such joy, such healing and abundance and happiness. So we feel blessed and can bless. And when more people experience this beauty and receive this grace, I think Dostoevsky is right. The world will be saved. So, number 3, radiant being and the guardian angel. Most spiritual traditions describe a guiding spirit that protects and guards us during our physical incarnation. The Roman Catholic Church actually has a Feast of Holy Guardian Angels celebrated every year on the 2nd of October. And not just spiritual traditions nowadays, but throughout history, there's been this constant background story that we have got some kind of spiritual support system. The Assyrians had the idea of a genie, and that's about 5,000 years ago now. They had the idea of a Shedu or a Lamassu who would defend us against nasty stuff, would protect people during a battle, would carry the prayers to the gods. And they had this really lovely phrase in the tablets we find: he who has no God, when he walks in the street, wears a headache like a bandage. I really like that, partly because it's headache, and that comes to the pineal gland. And you see how he's holding a pine cone there. Many people assume that that might be associated with the idea of the pineal gland, because that's what it looks like. But if you walk in the street without your God, without your support system, without acknowledging this other presence, then wearing a headache like a bandage seems like a really good phrase, because it's like you've got to think of everything. Whereas if you take on board that there's a spiritual assistant of some kind, then you don't need to think about everything. You can walk out with much more trust and you won't get a headache. The Zoroastrian tradition is a similar period, perhaps a little bit later. And they have the idea of Flavashi. It's a guardian angel, definitely would be described like that. And in this case, their idea is that the Flavashi actually sends the soul into the world. But in the version by Plato, who we come across in a minute, the soul actually is the other way around. The soul decides to come into the world and then chooses a guardian angel. But nonetheless, we still have this notion of some kind of spiritual assistance. The Hindu system, which is, well, we don't know how old the Hindu tradition is really, but a lot of it was developed around that time of 2000 years BCE. And there you get this word diva or Devi, and that has the same root, etymological root, as the Latin word deus or Greek dios, and therefore moves to the word Zeus, the great god Zeus. And basically this word is translated as something shining, something exalted, something celestial or heavenly. So the Deva is again a powerful spirit, and they appear in all levels of creation, although the nature spirits are not devas, although some people in the West and the New Age have tended to think devas are like nature spirits, but they have a different word for that: yakshas. So when I was young, I was privileged. Let me move this around a bit so I can get this. Oh, go away. I was privileged to have an aunt and an uncle who had been members of the Theosophical Society. And so I inherited, and I still own, this beautiful book, but Watchers of the Seven Spheres by Challoner. published in the 1930s. So this is, nearly 100 years old, or certainly 90. And here is something that Challoner says at the beginning of the book. One who desires for themselves to prove the existence of the shining ones, angels, devas, gods, call them by whatsoever name you will. One who would hear the sweetness of their voices, see their bright shapes moving at their appointed tasks in perfect harmony with the will which called them and all things forth into manifestation. One who would understand the laws of their being and would cooperate in their divine activities, let them learn to lift their consciousness above the conflicting and deceptive forms, the changing illusions of stability, which torment the dweller in the world of sense. Let them seek that sphere where light and sound, in their infinitely changing shapes and patterns, reflect, as in a lake's still midday surface, the flawless image of divine thought. So Challoner is basically saying, if you want to prove to yourself that this is possible, there are these beings, then what you have to do is lift your consciousness out of the everyday hustle bustle. You could say you have to close off the monkey mind, which is consistently grabbing and getting and manipulating, it's a kind of left brain activity all the time. You have got to close that off in order to find a different sphere or a different realm of being, which is beautiful, harmonious, and graceful. So this is one of Challoner's own illustrations of the solar deva, and it's always been an extraordinary image for me, really beautiful, and I wish I'd painted it myself, because I certainly have experienced angelic and archangelic beings in this kind of way, they're having this vibrating kind of energy. And, considering he's only using watercolors here, he's done a pretty excellent job. I found when I was hunting for good images, I found this one, which is obviously computer generated, but which does sort of give you a very similar kind of energetic response. And it did make me wonder whether this person had seen Challoner's paintings, and it could quite likely be AI generated, which I don't usually like, but this one is quite exquisite. So the Greeks, we have Socrates and Plato, and they talk about a kind of wise supporter that comes in with you when you're born, called a daimon. And Socrates claimed to have a daimonian, he just called it. And that literally means a divine something, some kind of divinity was hanging around Socrates. And it frequently warned him against mistakes, but it never told him actually what to do. It always told him what not to do, which was, his followers felt really unfortunate, because they suggested to Socrates, when he was condemned to death, that he should escape from Athens. And the daimon did not tell him, did not warn him. And so he stayed in Athens, because the daimon had not indicated that it was a mistake. And In Plato's work, in the Symposium, we have a character who's a priestess called Diotima, and she explains that everything daimonian is between the divine and the mortal. And she describes the daimons as interpreting and transporting human things to the gods and divine things to men. So they're intermediaries. Entreaties and sacrifices from below, ordinances and requitals from above. So it's an exchanging mechanism so that you can request something and receive something. You can be blessed. The Romans have a very similar idea. They call it the genius. And in pre-Christian Rome, the genius is a unique presence of divinity, which is present in everything, in a place or a thing or a person. And much like a guardian angel, the genius would follow each person from the hour of birth until the day of death. So there's, again, a feeling that this is what we're getting here in the Western tradition quite a lot is almost that this is a separate being. So then we have what's called Neoplatonism, which is like a later version of Plato. And there's a very famous Neoplatonist called Proclus, who is 400, that's the 5th century after Christ. And he has this phrase, the Orgo Hades of Huma, which is the luminous vehicle of your soul. And that is immortal. And this is very much like a Renaissance idea, because a lot of Renaissance philosophers followed Neoplatonism. And they had a description of the body of light. And that, of course, goes on and is brought up again in the 19th century as the astral body. So we have this luminous vehicle, but we also have a pneumatic vehicle, which is the irrational soul, which is mostly considered not to be immortal because it's associated with the breath. And of course, the breath goes when the body goes, but the light doesn't. The light can move forward, even though the breath has stopped. So I think that's what they were considering there. Now, to move slightly further forward and talk about the 19th century ideas that we find in the esoteric traditions, one of the most famous systems, which, as I said, Yeats was a member of, was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And people who joined that, wanting to become adepts, they had very complicated rituals in order to open conversations with what they called the Holy Guardian Angel. And they definitely regarded this personal angel as identical with the genius, the Algerides, or the daimon, or also the Atman, which you find in Hinduism. But that's not necessarily quite right, but one could understand why. But the Atman means the real self of the individual, or the innermost essence. And sometimes it is translated as soul, but might be better to be the self. And the Golden Dawn practitioners, as I said, seem to have equated it with the Holy guardian angel. But Ant-Man is associated with breath rather than light. So it might have been a pneumaticon rather than a luminous vehicle. But you can see how all these different concepts and these layers of different languages and different names for this presence within us have emerged over many, many, many generations of spiritual seekers. And in a sense, how you choose to describe this is very personal. Obviously, as you can tell, I'm nowadays using the expression radiant being. Because although I wrote books about guardian angels, I got concerned that people tended to think a guardian angel was something separate from them. So this is why my new book coming up is actually called The Radiant Being, Release Your Radiant Being. Because this radiant being, well, here I've described it as more like being a seraph rather than just an everyday angel. Because a seraph is a higher vibration, more intense, angelic or celestial being. And the word comes from a Hebrew root meaning to burn. So, this is why you might see it in the burning bush, because it's really intense. And it's like your twin or your beloved, but it's not a distinct entity. It's like your luminous body of light, your shining divine template. And it is immensely powerful. So it can work, it does work as a guardian angel, and does speak to you. It can say something in your head. Sometimes it says something outside your head. Whoa, what? What's that? And it can protect you. It can stop you running into the road too quickly because the lights haven't changed. So it has the capacity to make a difference in your material reality. It's not just something completely abstract. And in some of my talks and workshops in previous years, I've often thought of, the angelic being or the radiant being like the sleeping beauty in her tower. And you've got to get to the tower, you've got to cut through the brambles. But I began to think, you can't use that story because she's not asleep, The radiant being doesn't go to sleep. You're just ignoring her or it. But perhaps she is like the princess in the tower. And putting her in a tower does, as metaphorically represent the elevation from the everyday world. You actually do need to, as Challoner said, lift your consciousness out of your everyday concerns, but you've still got to have some anchorage in the world in order to be grounded. But you've got to be able to move into that change of consciousness. And maybe we put her in a tower, and maybe by doing that, we kind of isolated her from our everyday activities. Because maybe there's a sense of vulnerability. If you shine your radiant being in the world, what response will you potentially receive from other people? That's an interesting thing to consider, because it's so unusual for people to do that. So the new book that I've been writing is How to Release Your Radiant Being. And I suggest that people need to go on different stages to do this. You need to take inner journeys, what people call creative visualizations, or sometimes people call it guided meditation. And by doing that, you can actually meet your radiant being. You kind of open the portal by just saying that you're going to do it. And in my course, Release Your Radiant Being, there's an exercise that I would give you to go through that process. And I suggest to people that whatever guided journeys they want to take, they need to have a practice of ordinary meditation anyway, because that it's like preparing the ground. It's like before you do the visualizations, you need to know that you can get into the right space. So there's meditation, and then there are guided journeys, and those are two different things. Meditation takes you into a deep state of consciousness, stillness, sacred place within. Then you go into a mode where you can use a visualization process and active imagination process to get the information, start the conversations, open up to the knowledge that you can receive. And one of the things you can learn by doing that is to understand why you come into this incarnation in the first place. Why are you here right now at this time? And another aspect of this is what I call spiritual gardening. It's clearing the old brambles and the weeds. And those are your old stories. Some of those stories may have been with you for several lifetimes. So they're not all going to be easily dismissed. But the more times you go into the deep states of meditation and experience the light within, the smoother and easier it is to, the brambles will kind of melt in a way when you do these, when you go on these journeys. And you can heal really difficult karma. I mean, karma is not bad. Some karma is really good and brings positive results and abundance. But some karma is really draining and keeps you in a place that you want to move on from. And also in these processes, you can open what I call the gates of light, and you can meet celestial guides. So in the classes that I teach, I make great use of the Tree of Life, which many of you watching may already know a lot about. And it's like a template for working inwardly, which I've used for years, and is incredibly helpful because it gives us some markers in the way in what we're trying to do. And this is, as I say, spiritual gardening. And we can make journeys using this as our map, and we can meet celestial guides at these at the Sephirot, which are sometimes called the gates or portals of light. And the guides or the guardians of the gates are the archangels, and they can assist us in shedding our old habits and therefore lifting the karma. And this idea of looking at a tree or a plant is found in all kinds of places. The poet Dylan Thomas describes the force that through the green fuse drives the flower drives my green age. He's talking about the élan vital, the same vitality that moves through a plant or a tree is what is moving through us, moving through you as an individual. So you are a living organism, like a plant or a tree, and you need to keep that organism healthy from a physical perspective, and you need to, clean up the inner flow of energy. This is why the tree of life is so helpful. It's this template. So in the Hebrew language, what is flowing through is the Shefa, or that's descending from a resource of Ein Sof Or, which is limitless light. There's no limit to the amount of Shefa that can come through the tree. But the tree provides the formula, the limitation, so that something can manifest. So what the Jewish Kabbalists were doing when they worked out these systematic methods, what they were trying to do was to explain from their experience how something limitless and transcendental and without any form could actually manifest something in the physical creation that we experience. And each of the sephira on the Tree of Life represents an archetypal opportunity or a style, a way by which we can engage in these creative conversations, and then we can gain inner wisdom. So these sephirot are, as I said, portals or gates of light. And each one of them is guarded by an archangel, and we can encounter those archangels in our inner journeys. During inner journeys, we can choose which ones we want to befriend and have conversations with. So this is my own Tree of Life version with archangels on it, which you can actually see on my website, Theolyn.com. And just to briefly say that in 1982, I encountered the archangels without really asking, actually. Well, I didn't ask for the first one, and then after I knew what was going on, I did ask for the others. And I attempted to create some images from my inner vision. I attempted to paint them just for my own benefit. I had no intention of writing books about them. And then in 93, I channeled messages because it was like everything had opened up. But you can see it's quite a long period of time when I'm working like this. So it's nearly 10 years before the messages arrived. That's partly because I was a busy mother as well. And then in 97, we published these messages, and we published cards with images taken from my paintings. And as I say, you can see those on my website. If you become a member, which is free, you can get access to sorry about that. So, and I also have a book called Working with Archangels, which is available on Amazon, and it explains, this process, this inner process. But one thing I do want to say, and I always say in my workshops, is that you will experience the archangel in your own way. My images in this pack of cards have emerged out of personal experiences, and I think they're very helpful to people because I've seen that they are. But no one should be surprised if they experience an archangel looking different from this. So let's think about this radiant energy as being like a battery, an electrical battery. And another Gnostic phrase from Jesus is about if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So that's really scary. But I think what he's saying here is that this power, which is flowing through you all the time, is there for your sustenance. It's there for you to be using all the time for creating your own personal healing, for sharing the blessings in the world, and for you to bring it out. Because if you don't bring it out, it's like, eating too many calories or something. You just put weight on. And that's actually not good for the system. So he's warning you. He's both explaining the power of it, but he's also delivering this slightly finger wagging warning that you do need to be in touch with this radiance, because otherwise things can be going on for you which are unconscious, which you don't know, which are sometimes, I like to say, below the water level of your awareness, and therefore can do you some harm in your physiology. And this may be why people do actually get sick in various ways, which are really bad for them. So keeping the health of this system in good shape, both from a physical perspective, that's to do with diet and exercise and all those outer things, but also from the inner perspective, the meditation and the constant awareness of what is going on with your radiant being and your relationship with it is absolutely key to living a joyful life. And this radiant power, and it can feel really impersonal because it's so big, it's so vast, it's so cosmic, so much bigger than our individual selves. But when we experience it directly in every cell and atom of our own physiology, it becomes intimate. It is our radiant being, it's directly enmeshed, it's entwined with everything that we're doing every day, and with our goals and our hopes and our dreams. And unlike the plant, we have the capacity to consciously respond and to co-create with this power. So Jesus also says, let the seeker keep seeking until he finds. And when he finds, he will be disturbed, because it's so unusual, really, to the way you normally think about who you are. And when he is disturbed, he will be amazed. And when he is amazed, he will be invincible to everything. And when he is invincible to everything, he will be at rest. It will be a sense of perfection, beauty, harmony, grace. And this is another page, as I'm beginning to wind up, from Challoner's book. It's a facing page to that painting that I showed you of the solar deva. And he associates the solar deva with the sign of Aries. In astrology, the sun is exalted in the sign of Aries. And he uses a very old-fashioned masculine language, of course, with lords and so forth. But I am a ray from the Lord of Light, who is the fire creative, one with the hidden word, thrilling through the cosmos, makes itself manifest in the mighty builders whose reflections am I. And he describes the deva as an intermediary and the urge, which is life, is pulsing forever. And it's quite interesting to think about this particular solar deva at this time in history, because right now, Aries, the sign of Aries, is an energetic quality which can colour our history, because there are two major planetary ingresses during 25-26 into the sign of Aries, which any of you who follow astrological podcasts can learn about, because it's such a significant shift in the planetary movements. And Neptune is one of them. And she, I always think of Neptune as she, tends to dissolve the old boundaries and set up ideal concepts for new ones, and then Saturn can create the new ones. So they're not entirely happy together, these two archetypes. And in order to make these changes, which in the sign of Aries are really important, because Aries is a creative sign that wants to make new things happen. In that sign, those two planets will want to make things change. And then changes might not always be comfortable. So tend your divine fire, keep meditating. Like Jesus again, I have lit a spark in the midst of the world, and I'm tending it until it becomes a blaze. And tend your lamp, keep shining. After all, no one lights a lamp and puts a jug over it, nor hides it away somewhere. Instead, it's put on a lampstand, so that anyone who is near to it will see its light. And there's a little link down there in case you want to get one of these rather beautiful lamps, which don't cost a lot to run. You can put in your window. So I run a course, Release Your Radiant Being, an 8-week Zoom course with weekly classes and guided journeys to use at home. And I include the Schaefer method with that for new students. And I'm offering that in the spring and autumn of 2025. If you were interested, because you followed this video, then just get in touch with me and I can give you the syllabus and the prices. And finally, don't forget, free membership of Theolyn at theolyn.com gives you access to all kinds of free content. And if you join and you email me, you can request the opening chapters of my new book for free. So please get in touch. And I hope you've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed putting it together. And I hope it's helpful and inspiring. And I hope to hear from you. Don't forget to like this and subscribe to the channel and to be in touch. Many blessings.